This is the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. I'm going to get into another book. Now, it's actually a long essay, rather. And it's online. You can access this for free. And all the other works by this extremely assiduous researcher off of his website for free. And they're worth more than probably... One of his essays is probably worth more than any other book on your bookshelf. Seriously. And yet you can access this for free. I printed up all of his essays and have them arranged like books just on regular printer paper, one-sided, because my printer only does one side, but I got them all on my bookshelf. They are a prized possession, really. I want to say I can't believe what this researcher found out, and his cohort found the same thing out independently, and they both share the same website. I originally didn't believe it. It took some prodding from my good buddy Visigoth to convince me, because I started to have one of those knee-jerk reactions again. When I first heard this stuff, I thought, come on, this is baloney, this is crazy. Same reaction I had when I heard the stuff about the Vatican murdering, being at the top of the conspiracy to murder Abraham Lincoln and all of our other presidents who've ever been poisoned. I had that same knee-jerk, purely emotional reaction that blocks out your intellectual process. And doggone it, it's the same reaction that your average Joe has when you tell him anything truthful that's not in the mainstream news, and that's basically anything truthful. And then they jump to that knee-jerk, purely emotional, anti-intellectual, anti-cerebral reaction, and they tell you, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, and that just shows how much he's brainwashed, yada, yada, yada. But I had that a couple of times. I even after I was mostly, I would say, awakened to the reality of the world around us. And it took Visigoth both times to take me aside and say, bro, you need to do the homework before you make a decision on this. Don't just make a decision out of ignorance, basically. And coming from a guy like that, that really brought me up short. And I went and did the research. And I found out the guy, oh man, it was true, and the wizard is behind the curtain, and the wizard is more mysterious and elaborate and larger than life, and that wizard behind the curtain gets bigger all the time. Wow. Another thing Visigoth and I have noticed, though, together, very, very few people, even amongst those who listen to folks like us and come on our shows and write books and show they're mostly awake, they know the reality of the world, that the whole world lies in delusion. Nevertheless, even those people, when they come across something that's too outrageous, they shut down, just like I started to do, and Viz helped me through both times. People just shut down and they can't deal with it, and they dismiss it just out of pure emotions and complete lack of gray matter. So that even happens, and it's happened a few times with former guests of mine and Biz, and we just kind of let those people go their ignorant way until they wake up, because they wouldn't listen to us. They wouldn't stop their emotional reaction and do their homework. And anyway, I think I mentioned last month there were a couple of listeners who came up and visited me, and we had black and tans and cigars and at the local Irish pub here, and it was great. It was great talking to two brothers about stuff that men are too damn ignorant to know anymore. The truth, men in America. But one of them alerted me and sent me the link to a book. I had planned on getting into that book with the next one. I'm going to get to that book next, after this one, because that book does appear very significant. Now, that's a real book. That's a good-sized book, and it's out of print from the 1800s. And, boy, he knows what it is, and it deals with familiar subject matter to this show and all of that. But anyway, with this book, with this essay, I need to read this. This guy has actually, this researcher, his name is James Montgomery. He and his researching cohort, the Informer, independently, completely, for years, prior to having met at least, they came to the same conclusion from years of very painstaking research in law libraries and places, university libraries, I suppose, but they, researching old documents, they basically proved that as the title of this essay tells, the United States is still a British colony. And this guy, James Montgomery, you go to atgpress.com. It stands for againstthegrainpress.com. Click on, well, you can click on the Informer. He tells you the same stuff through a lot of essays. I prefer, and the same stuff, that's right. I prefer clicking on Knowledge is Freedom, and then you get to the work of this guy, James Montgomery. James Montgomery is noticeably better at editing. Both of them could use a proofreader, an editor, because they didn't have one. And any person who writes a book, whether anybody, you need an editor. But when you're a small-time, one-horse operation and you're writing, that's all you got yourself. And so there's going to be type errors. There's going to be grammatical errors. And there's a few here with James Montgomery. I just found that there's a lot with the Informer, and at times, although his research is impeccable, it makes it hard to read. I know the Informer harps on the importance of diagramming sentences in school, and I don't know, it's a little hypocritical because he doesn't really write that well. He can't diagram his own sentences, basically, as he's writing them. Anyway, he means well. His research is fantastic. He needs help in his writing, the Informer. James Montgomery is a little more clear. He's a better writer, basically. They're both about the same as far as researching power, researching depth. Now, and both of them have written numerous articles, numerous long essays documenting all of this. This is just one, and it's entitled, again, "The United States is Still a British Colony." Maybe it's just the title that makes this essay jump out the most at the online viewer. Nevertheless, all of the articles on there. Go to atgpress.com, click on Knowledge is Freedom, read the research articles of James Montgomery. There's a wealth of materials there, and they all are fantastic and in-depth. And guess what? They're all irrefutable. Trust me. You'll find out. You'll get the upset stomach. You'll get nauseated. You've been lied to, folks. The United States is still a British colony. And so this is the essay we are going to get into on the Ministry of Truth. Now, the reason I want to take a detour and read this, I didn't plan on reading this next, but I've been hearing people close to me, people I trust, people who are dear friends of mine, companions, cohorts, and brothers in the faith of mine who I hear them starting to appeal to the Constitution again. And that troubles me because they have heard some of this material. So I decided, well, you obviously haven't read it in any depth, or else you would not be appealing to the Constitution, even though you've been told a number of times now by the legendary Visigoth and myself that the Constitution was a fraud. A total fraud. The Founding Fathers were lawyers. They were liars. They were frauds. They sold out their own people. The United States, the colonies, never won the Revolutionary War. It was a backdoor Masonic deal to limit the battle damage, make it look like a war, and keep the profits going for England and for the wealthy, elitist, lawyerly families like the founding quote-unquote fathers in the colonies. And basically, the reason it appeared for so long that Americans had these rights and so-called rights and freedoms for so long, for a few decades anyway, after the Revolutionary War, it was mostly to do with geography, folks. It was not in the documents of the Constitution. The Constitution does not apply to the common man, as we're about to find out. Not even the Declaration of Independence applied to the common man, as we are about to find out. And if you go back in history, things like even the Magna Carta, they're worthless documents. They're worth about the same as a toilet paper roll, the Magna Carta was. Completely worthless. James Montgomery will show you. He documents it. For one thing, this King John that was forced by the nobles in England to sign the Magna Carta, well, the Pope immediately declared the Magna Carta null and void. And King John, by the way, a few years prior had given England to the Pope. So England was not King John's to give away to these barons, these noblemen, forcing at sword point the Magna Carta upon King John. And here, there you go. It's a document signed under duress, and even today we know a document signed under duress is not a legal document. So the Magna Carta was worthless. Basically, folks, here it is in a nutshell. I hope I can get it down to that. Folks, the common man, you have no rights except for those that Jesus Christ gave you as a saved soul, but He liberated your soul if you will take the sacrifice, take the opportunity He gave you. But your body is not going to have any actual rights until Jesus Christ returns and rules the earth with a rod of iron. Until then, everything you have that you think are rights, they are actually privileges. And that we're in slavery. We always have been. And it's remarkable that even people who get it, even people who are very close to me, who know that everything's a fraud around us, the whole world lies in a strong delusion that because of our sinful ways, God has given us over unto. And Satan loves deceiving the whole world, and Revelation tells us that. He's got the whole world deluded, does Satan. And everything on your mainstream news, flip it upside down if you want the truth. 9/11 was a fraud. The Oklahoma City bombings was a fraud. Korean airline 007 that was shot down in Russia was a fraud. Nothing TWA 800 that was shot down off the coast of New Jersey. That was a fraud. Pearl Harbor, the Lusitania, the explosion of the Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, on and on and on. The stock market crash, the Federal Reserve. Even people who know that all of those are frauds and the truth is almost completely reverse what mainstream news tells us, even those who get it and are Christian, even those, and they've been guests on my show, really except for Viz, they all still will hearken back occasionally to this Constitution as being somehow a fount of liberty for Americans, and they don't know that it's completely faulty. They should know better, basically, is what I'm trying to say, because the Constitution, you're still dealing there with man's law. It's weird. The propaganda you're fed in school about the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, it's like people who really get it, and already you're in rarefied company if you get it and you understand that history is a fraud. And then, if you understand that the Bible, that God's Word is true, the real God's Word. I mean, aren't very many people who do that, but once you get to that point, it's weird. Even those people will still latch on. They'll say, yeah, all history's been a fraud, basically. And the only thing we can trust is God's true Word. However, there was this one time in history, this one completely atypical time, when you had a few honorable lawyers get together in colonial America and write this wonderful document to set mankind free. That was the one time when mankind became noble. The one time when lawyers became noble. That was it, the one time. And come on. Doesn't that right there, the picture I just painted, all of mankind's history, all of mankind's laws, it's all about tyranny, and profits is what it's really all about, profits. But there was this one time when that didn't apply. The U.S. Revolution, the Revolutionary War and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That was the one time where mankind became noble. Stop and think about that. Would the Lord really allow that to happen? Allow there to be one time in history where elitist humans suddenly became not elitists and became truthful and told the truth and weren't about profits and wanted to rule a country not about profits. They weren't driven just by profits. They wanted to be truthful as God's Word is truthful. Do you think God would really allow that to happen? No. All of mankind's history. In the Constitution, it set up a Calvinist republic. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. How many times does it mention Jesus Christ in the document? 0. Okay, how many times does the Declaration of Independence mention Jesus Christ? 0. Okay, but it mentions God and Lord. Well, gee, the founding framers were mostly Freemasons, and the Freemasons have their God and Lord, who is actually the ancient Baal deity, and they now call him the great architect of the universe. But it's no different than ancient Bel or Baal worship. It's just amazing. It's so frustrating. Well, anyway, that's why, belatedly, I'm telling you, I'm finally getting to the point. This is why I have to read this. You folks, you need to listen. If you have any faith in the Constitution, stop and listen to this, please. I took the trouble of doing my homework in this area. I took the trouble of spending my money on paper and ink, printing all of this up, the voluminous essays from both the Informer and James Montgomery. It fills up half a bookshelf, half a long bookshelf in my office room that's running out of room. And I read them all, and I highlighted them all. As I read, I made notes on them all. And I'm telling you, even if you just listen, stop what you're doing, and listen to just this one article by James Montgomery, you'll be totally convinced. It's irrefutable. The Constitution was a fraud. The founding framers were lawyers. They were frauds. The Declaration of Independence did not ever apply to the common American, you and me. It was a corporate deal, a Masonic corporate backdoor lawyer deal. And the United States is still a British colony. This was written in 1996 by James Montgomery. The trouble with history is, we weren't there when it took place, and it can be changed to fit someone's belief and or traditions. Or it can be taught in the public schools to favor a political agenda and withhold many facts. I know you have been taught that we won the Revolutionary War and defeated the British, but I can prove to the contrary. I want you to read this paper with an open mind and allow yourself to be instructed with the following verifiable facts. You be the judge, and don't let prior conclusions on your part or incorrect teaching keep you from the truth. I, too, was always taught in school and in studying our history books that our freedom came from the Declaration of Independence and was secured by our winning the Revolutionary War. I'm going to discuss a few documents that are included at the end of this paper in the footnotes. The first document is the first Charter of Virginia in 1606. See footnote 1. In the first paragraph, the King of England granted our forefathers license to settle and colonize America. The definition for license is as follows, from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914, quote, "In government regulation, authority to do some act or carry on some trade or business, in its nature lawful, but prohibited by statute, except with the permission of the civil authority, or which would otherwise be unlawful," unquote. Keep in mind, those that came to America from England were British subjects. So you can better understand what I'm going to tell you, here are the definitions for subject and citizen. Again, Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914. Quote, "In monarchical governments, by subject is meant one who owes permanent allegiance to the monarch," unquote. The following is from the 5th edition of Black's Law Dictionary. Quote, "Constitutional law, one that owes allegiance to a sovereign and is governed by his laws. The natives of Great Britain are subjects of the British government. Men in free governments are subjects as well as citizens. As citizens, they enjoy rights and franchises. As subjects, they are bound to obey the laws. The term is little used in this sense in countries enjoying a republican form of government," unquote. I chose to give the definition for subject first, so you could better understand what definition of citizen is really being used in American law. Below is the definition of citizen from Roman law, from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914. Quote, "The term citizen was used in Rome to indicate the possession of private civil rights, including those accruing under the Roman family and inheritance law, and the Roman contract and property law. All other subjects were peregrines. But in the beginning of the 3rd century, the distinction was abolished, and all subjects were citizens," unquote. The king was making a commercial venture when he sent his subjects to America and used his money and resources to do so. I think you would admit the king had a lawful right to receive gain and prosper from his venture. In the Virginia Charter, he declares his sovereignty over the land, and his subjects, and in paragraph 9 he declares the amount of gold, silver, and copper he is to receive, if any is found by his subjects. There could have just as easily been none, or his subjects could have been killed by the Indians. This is why this was a valid right of the king. See Black's 4th edition, Jure Coronae, quote, in the right of the crown, unquote. The king expended his resources with the risk of total loss. If you'll notice in paragraph 9, the king declares that all his heirs and successors were to also receive the same amount of gold, silver, and copper that he claimed with this charter. The gold that remained in the colonies was also the king's. He provided the remainder as a benefit for his subjects, which amounted to further use of his capital. You will see in this paper that not only is this valid, but it is still in effect today. If you will read the rest of the Virginia Charter, you will see that the king declared the right and exercised the power to regulate every aspect of commerce in his new colony. A license had to be granted for travel connected with transfer of goods, i.e. commerce, right down to the furniture they sat on. A great deal of the king's declared property was ceded to America in the Treaty of 1783. I want you to stay focused on the money and the commerce which was not ceded to America. This brings us to the Declaration of Independence. Our freedom was declared because the king did not fulfill his end of the covenant between king and subject. The main complaint was taxation without representation, which was reaffirmed in the early 1606 charter granted by the king. It was not a revolt over being subject to the King of England. Most wanted the protection and benefits provided by the king. Because of the king's refusal to hear their demands and grant relief, separation from England became the lesser of two evils. The cry of freedom and self-determination became the rallying cry for the colonist. The slogan, "Don't tread on me," was the standard borne by the militias. The Revolutionary War was fought and concluded when Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown. As Americans, we have been taught that we defeated the king and won our freedom. The next document I will use is the Treaty of 1783, which will totally contradict our having won the Revolutionary War. See footnote 2. I want you to notice in the first paragraph that the king refers to himself as Prince of the Holy Roman Empire and of the United States. You know from this that the United States did not negotiate this treaty of peace in a position of strength and victory, but it is obvious that Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams negotiated a treaty of further granted privileges from the King of England. Keep this in mind as you study these documents. You also need to understand the players of those that negotiated this treaty. For the Americans, it was Benjamin Franklin, Esquire, a great patriot and standard-bearer of freedom. Or was he? His title includes esquire. An esquire, in the above usage, was a granted rank and title of nobility by the king, which is below knight and above a yeoman or common man. An esquire is someone that does not do manual labor as signified by this status. See the below definitions from Blackstone's commentaries, quote, "Esquires, by virtue of their offices, as justices of the peace, and others who bear any office of trust under the crown, for whosoever studieth the laws of the realm, who studieth in the universities, who professeth the liberal sciences, and who can live idly and without manual labor, and will bear the port, charge, and countenance of a gentleman, he shall be called master, and he shall be taken for a gentleman," unquote. The following is from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Quote, "Esquire, in English law, a title of dignity next above gentleman and below knight. Also, a title of office given to sheriffs, sergeants, and barristers at law, justices of the peace, and others," unquote. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, as you can read in the treaty, were all esquires, and were the signers of this treaty, and the only negotiators of the treaty. The representative of the king was David Hartley, Esquire. Benjamin Franklin was the main negotiator for the terms of the treaty. He spent most of the war traveling between England and France. The use of esquire declared his and the others' British subjection and loyalty to the crown. In the first article of the treaty, most of the king's claims to America are relinquished, except for his claim to continue receiving gold, silver, and copper as gain for his business venture. Article 3 gives Americans the right to fish the waters around the United States and its rivers. In Article 4, the United States agreed to pay all bona fide debts. If you will read my other papers on money, you will understand that the financiers were working with the king. Why else would he protect their interest with this treaty? Side note, boy, does that ever dovetail with the last book I just completed, The Babylonian Woe by David Astle, where Astle is always remarking on the shadowy powers, the powers behind the throne. The money powers are always there in any civilization. They're the real powers, but you never see them, or you seldom see them. But the front man, whatever king or tyrant they put forth, will always look out for them, will always protect them. And here we go, the King of England protecting their interests in the Treaty of 1783. Okay. I wonder if you have seen the main and obvious point. This treaty was signed in 1783. The war was over in 1781. If the United States defeated England, how is the King of England granting rights to America when we were now supposedly his equal in status? We supposedly defeated him in the Revolutionary War. So why would these supposed patriot Americans sign such a treaty when they knew that this would void any sovereignty gained by the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War? If we had won, the Revolutionary War, the king granting us our land would not be necessary. It would have been ours by his loss of the Revolutionary War. To not dictate the terms of a peace treaty in a position of strength after winning a war means the war was never won. Think of other wars we have won, such as when we defeated Japan. Did General MacArthur allow Japan to dictate to him the terms for surrender? No way. All these men, these quote-unquote founding fathers, all they did is gain status and privilege granted by the king and ensure the subjection of future unaware generations. Worst of all, they sold out those that gave their lives and property for the chance to be free. You know, that totally ties in today with the wars going on overseas, the wars for empire in Afghanistan and Iraq. Who's largely, foolishly, pathetically sending their boys off to be, and now they're girls, and now they're daughters. How tragically, how insultingly, the ignorance, the shamefulness of it. But who's sending their children off to be cannon fodder nowadays? Oh, it's the patriotic Americans who call themselves Christians by and large, isn't it? Come on, you know you've met them. Come on, they got flags up on their cars, and they have a constitution that they've never read, and they got a Bible that they've never read, but boy, they're Christians and they're patriot Americans, aren't they? And they're sending their boys and now girls overseas to be cannon fodder. Well, guess what? You hear these stories in the Revolutionary War of, was it the Black Brigade? The preachers in the colonies who led up the militias and had called out the militias and the Minutemen to go fight the British. And they did a stellar job on the battlefield. What they did was totally brave. However, they were also completely sold out, and it accomplished nothing because they were sold out at the top. And so even you see back then, Christians picking up the sword, picking up the rifle to go and fight. And all it gets them is killed and sold out and taken advantage of back then, because their leaders back then sold them out. And it's still happening today. Foolish Christians or people calling themselves Christians are fighting the battles of the oligarchs. They're fighting the battles of the enemy, of Satan. And yet they're Christian, at least calling themselves Christian, and maybe, well, I'm sure some of them, a lot of them are. Anyway, history doesn't change. Think of your redneck Christian over there fighting for democracy and liberty in Afghanistan. That's what you had fighting the revolution, the Revolutionary War then. Anyway, here we go. Back to the essay. When Cornwallis surrendered to Washington, he surrendered the battle, folks, but he did not surrender the war. Read the article of capitulation signed by Cornwallis at Yorktown. See footnote 3. Jonathan Williams recorded in his book Legions of Satan, printed in 1781, that Cornwallis revealed to Washington during his surrender that, quote, a holy war will now begin on America, and when it is ended, America will be supposedly the citadel of freedom, but her millions will unknowingly be subjects to the crown. In less than 200 years, the whole nation will be working for divine world government. That government that they believe to be divine will be the British Empire, unquote. Wow, was that really written in 1781? Apparently so, folks. All the treaty did was remove the United States as a liability and obligation of the king. He no longer had to ship material and money to support his subjects and colonies. At the same time, he retained financial subjection through debt owed after the treaty, which is still being created today, millions of dollars a day, and his heirs and successors are still reaping the benefit of the king's original venture. That, folks, that means that in the 1980s, when you saw that big extravagant wedding on all the channels in America of Princess Di's wedding to Prince Charles, I hope you enjoyed that, because we paid for it. You paid for it, folks. Yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to the proof on that. If you will read the following quote from Title 26, you will see just one situation where the king is still collecting a tax from those that receive a benefit from him on property which is purchased with the money the king supplies at almost the same percentage. Ooh, boy. Next up is some IRS legalese. Should I get into that? I'll get into a little bit. Cite 26 U.S.C. Section 1491. Head Section 1491, Imposition of Tax. Statute. There is hereby imposed on the transfer of property by a citizen or a resident of the United States, or by a domestic corporation or partnership, or by an estate or trust which is not a foreign estate or trust, to a foreign corporation as paid in surplus, or as a contribution to capital, or to a foreign estate or trust, or to a foreign partnership, an excise tax equal to 35% of the excess of 1, the fair market value of the property so transferred, over 2, the sum of A, the adjustment basis for determining gain of such property in the hands of the transferor, plus B, the amount of the gain recognized to the transferor at the time of the transfer, source, yada, 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 amendments, yada, 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 all legalese. Oh, boy. This is it, man. This is why Jesus condemned these people, writing this parallel, bizarro world language that only they can understand and that they twist with situational ethics each time they read it. It's vague, abstruse legalese. Let's, effective date, 1976 amendment. Okay, going forward. Here we go. A new war was declared when the treaty was signed. The king wanted his land back, and he knew he would be able to regain his property for his heirs with the help of his world financiers. Here is a quote from the king speaking to Parliament after the Revolutionary War had concluded. This is 6 weeks after the capitulation of Yorktown. The King of Britain, in his speech to Parliament, November 27th, 1781, declared, quote, that he should not answer the trust committed to the sovereign of a free people if he consented to sacrifice either to his own desire of peace or to their temporary ease and relief those essential rights and permanent interests upon the maintenance and preservation of which the future strength and security of the country must forever depend, unquote. The determined language of this speech, pointing to the continuance of the American war, was echoed back by a majority of both Lords and Commons. In a few days after, on December 12th, it was moved in the House of Commons that a resolution should be adopted declaring it to be their opinion, quote, that all farther attempts to reduce the Americans to obedience by force would be ineffectual and injurious to the true interests of Great Britain, unquote. The rest of the debate can be found in footnote 4. What were the true interests of the king, the gold, silver, and copper? The new war was to be fought without Americans being aware that a war was even being waged. It was to be fought by subterfuge and key personnel being placed in key positions. The first two parts of my other essay, A Country Defeated in Victory, that's another great essay James Montgomery wrote, A Country Defeated in Victory. It's about the Revolutionary War. Go into detail about how this was done and exposes some of the main players. Every time you pay a tax, you are transferring your labor to the king, and his heirs and successors are still receiving interest from the original American charters. The following is the definition of tribute or tax. Quote, a contribution which is raised by a prince or sovereign from his subjects to sustain the expenses of the state. A sum of money paid by an inferior sovereign or state to a superior potentate to secure the friendship or protection of the latter. Unquote. This from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. As further evidence, not that any is needed, a percentage of taxes that are paid are to enrich the King or Queen of England. For those that study Title 26, you will recognize IMF, which means Individual Master File. All taxpayers have one. To receive one, you have to be able to break their codes using File 6209, which is about 467 pages. On your IMF, you will find a blocking series which tells you what type of tax you are paying. You will probably find a 300 to 399 blocking series, which 6209 says is reserved. You then look up the BMF 300 to 399, which is the Business Master File in 6209. You would have seen prior to 1991, this was US/UK tax claims non-refile DLN, meaning everyone is considered a business and involved in commerce, and you are being held liable for a tax via a treaty between the US and the UK payable to the UK. The form that is supposed to be used for this is Form 8288, FIRPTA, Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Account. You won't find many people using this form, just the 1040 form. The 8288 form can be found in the Law Enforcement Manual of the IRS, Chapter 3. If you will check the OMB's paper, Office of Management and Budget, in the Department of Treasury, list of active information collections approved under Paperwork Reduction Act, you will find this form under OMB number 1545-0902, which says U.S. withholding tax return for dispositions by foreign persons of U.S. real property interests statement of withholding on dispositions by foreign persons of U.S. Form number 8288, number 8288A. These codes have since been changed to read as follows. IMF 300 to 309, Barred Assessment, CP 55, generated valid for MFT 30, which is the code for 1040 form. IMF 310 to 399 reserved. The BMF 300 to 309, reads the same as IMF 300 to 309. BMF 390 to 399 reads US/UK tax treaty claims. The long and short of it is nothing's changed. The government just made it plainer. The 1040 is the payment of a foreign tax to the King or Queen of England. We have been in financial servitude since the Treaty of 1783. Read 'em and weep, folks. Read 'em and weep. Another treaty between England and the United States was Jay's Treaty of 1794, footnote 5. If you will remember from the Paris Treaty of 1783, John Jay, Esquire, was one of the negotiators of the treaty. In 1794, he negotiated another treaty with Britain. There was great controversy among the American people about this treaty. In Article 2, you will see the king is still on land that was supposed to be ceded to the United States at the Paris Treaty. This is 13 years after America supposedly won the Revolutionary War. I guess someone forgot to tell the King of England. In Article 6, the king is still dictating terms to the United States concerning the collection of debt and damages. The British government and world bankers claimed that we owe. In Article 12, we find the king dictating terms again, this time concerning where and with who the United States could trade. In Article 18, the United States agrees to a wide variety of material that would be subject to confiscation if Britain found said material going to its enemies' ports. Wait a minute. Who won the Revolutionary War? That's right. We were conned by some of our early forefathers into believing that we are free, that we are a sovereign people, when in fact we had the same status as before the Revolutionary War. I say had because our status today is far worse now than then. I will explain. Early on in our history, the king was satisfied with the interest made by the Bank of the United States. But when the bank charter was canceled in 1811, it was time to gain control of the government in order to shape government policy and public policy. Have you never asked yourself why the British, after burning the White House and all our early records during the War of 1812, why they left and did not take over the government? The reason they did, as much as they did do, was to remove the greatest barrier to their plans for this country. That barrier was the newly adopted 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The purpose for this amendment was to stop anyone from serving in the government who was receiving a title of nobility or honor. It was and is obvious that these government employees would be loyal to the grantor of the title of nobility or honor. The War of 1812 served several purposes. It delayed the passage of the 13th Amendment by Virginia, allowed the British to destroy the evidence of the first 12 states' ratification of this amendment, and it increased the national debt, which would coerce Congress to reestablish the bank charter in 1816 after the Treaty of Ghent was ratified by the Senate in 1815. We'll stop there for this time, and we will get into this forgotten amendment, the original 13th Amendment, next time, and your heads will flip. You will probably freak out when you hear this. The original 13th Amendment had nothing to do with the 13th Amendment that you know of today. Nothing at all. And it's the real main reason for the War of 1812. This is completely Twilight Zone-ish, erased, memory-hold history you are learning, and it's about to get a whole lot weirder next time. On the Ministry of Truth, we have been reading America is Still a British Colony by James Montgomery. This has been the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. Over and out.